Good evening, everybody. Good evening, school owners, school leaders. Welcome to the Nigerian Educators Hangout. My name is Carol Barlow from SEBA Consultancy and Training Services. I'm also the convener of the Nigerian Educators Hangout. So, the Nigerian Educators Hangout is a group. Sorry, I'm not sure. Something happened to my mic just then. The Nigerian Educators Hangout is a platform, a Facebook platform, a Facebook group that is designed for continuous professional development for teachers, for school owners, for school leaders, and for aspiring school leaders. So today we're going to be talking about school improvement and continuous professional development. So this is a workshop that we're going to be doing today, and it's designed specifically for school owners, but more importantly for school leaders who are looking to make a change, make a difference, raise standards in their school. So we're going to be staying on for about an hour or thereabouts, and I'll be sharing my screen with you. We've got Stella who will be in the background making a note of any comments that you want to share. Now, if you're on Facebook and you want to comment, or you want to ask a question, please make sure that you give permission to Facebook to use your name, so that we know that there's a link in the bio that I did. Use that link to give Facebook permission so that we know who we're talking to. So let's get started. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. And I will need my glasses for this one. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you, and we'll be going through some slides. So please just stay on board while I get myself set up. Okay, so I'm going over to my PowerPoint here, and we're going to get started. So today we're going to be talking about an introduction to school improvement. Now, because this is live and because this is we're trying to keep things as short as possible. This is just an introduction to school improvement. Obviously, if I was doing a full day training, then there'd be a lot more information there. So who am I? My name is Carol Barlow. I'm the CEO and Executive Consultant at SEBA Consultancy and Training Services. We specialize in school improvement and also building leadership capacity. I have over 25 years experience in education, but I've also been involved in other industries as well, and at all levels of leadership. And I've worked in the UK, in Africa, and beyond. So that's a little bit about me. So what are we going to try and cover today? And I'm going to be moving quite quickly, so please make notes. Maybe you can even take screenshots as we're going through. And then if you've got any questions, we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So we're going to be looking at what drives school improvement. What are the key priorities for rapid school improvement, and what does that look like? It's something that very often is not done particularly well in African environs, in my experience, but it is something that's fundamental to what every school is expected to do in the UK. So that's why we're going to be looking at this issue today. And how do we drive a culture of change within your school, within your organisation? So let's first of all look at the challenges of school improvement in Africa as opposed to what we have in the UK. First of all, there is a lack of comparative national school data. We don't have access to comparative school data. We don't have a database of all schools, a database of every student that enters the school system, whereas we do in the UK, and we can track pupils' progress over a very long period of time. Even if students are moving school, teachers are moving school, we can track school data over a period of time and throughout the career of that student. So we don't have that here in Africa, and specifically in Nigeria. There are minimum standards of education. There are minimum standards for teachers, but it's limited. I've had a look at them, and they are limited to the qualifications teachers are supposed to have, the CPD or the professional development expectations. In other words, you're supposed to attend at least one conference every year. You're expected to do at least 2 trainings every year, and it has standards with regards to the use of instructional materials. But what it doesn't have is the minimum standards for teaching practice and pedagogy and those sorts of things. So that's lacking in the Nigerian setting. There's a lack of adequate funding for infrastructure, which means that even where schools are trying to do their best and looking at the best quality education, they can't always do that because there's a lack of funding for infrastructure. If we even look at the COVID season that we're in right now, just simply being able to have ICT infrastructures, network capacity, the ability to communicate safely with your students online, those infrastructures are just not there. Also, although there is an inspection framework for schools, the inspectorate is supposed to attend and visit schools at least twice in a term. It's limited, the inspection framework for schools is limited to what is being delivered rather than how it is being delivered. So they're looking at the content of students' books, they're looking at the content of teachers' lesson plans or lesson notes, but they're not necessarily looking at the quality of teaching and learning and what's going on in the classrooms, how those lessons are being delivered. And that's one of the mainstays. Now, I'm going to be basing this presentation on some research by an organization called Educational Development Trust. They did some research on schools that have rapidly improved. And these were some of the key priorities for school improvement. Number one is improving teacher effectiveness. Now, what they said in this research is that improving teacher effectiveness and impact, so in other words, not just the way teachers teach, but the effectiveness of that teaching on learning is a key aspect for school improvement. Driving that improvement is the effectiveness of leadership. And actually, if I were doing this list, I would have put the effectiveness of leadership first. So in order for schools to improve, you need to have effective leadership. Effective leadership will now drive teacher effectiveness and the impact of that. There must be an improvement in data monitoring and the tracking of pupil progress. Now, some of you will notice that I've put pupil progress in bold because something that is very significant that is done in the UK that is not done here is we don't measure progress here in Nigeria. What we do measure is attainment, what students have achieved. And actually the limitation of that is that the achievement or the attainment, the grade that students get is dependent on the quality, it's very much dependent on the quality of the assessment given. So if you give a student 10 questions and they are all, let's take maths. 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on and so forth. And they're very low level questions, as opposed to very, very challenging, very challenging questions. You're going to get a different output. You're going to get most students achieving very well, getting good grades, and therefore attainment actually doesn't have a value unless the quality of the assessment is also rigorously done. So we need to be able to improve data monitoring the achievement of students over a period of time and checking pupil progress, not just over time, but pupils in the lessons, pupils on each topic, pupils over a period of time. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. We need to also look at improving school self-evaluation. Now, what I've identified in the African setting is that school leaders tend to try to present a very rosy picture of what the school is looking like. So they don't have the capacity and the ability to be honest and transparent and to be able to do a self-evaluation. It's really, really important that school leaders are able to do an honest and transparent self-evaluation, looking at the effectiveness of teaching, the effectiveness of progress of students over time, the effectiveness of leadership, the effectiveness of the school overall in terms of, what do the parents feel about the school, what do the other stakeholders in the environment think about the school. So it's really important, if you're going to improve a school, that you improve the school's ability to self-evaluate, and particularly looking at the monitoring by senior and middle leaders. It's also important, if you're going to improve a school, to improve the opportunities for teachers to develop their professional practice. That means training, it means coaching, it means mentoring, it means peer observations, and a wide range of other things that teachers can do to develop their professional practice. It also is imperative that if senior leaders are going to be effective in what they're doing, they need to strengthen subject and middle leadership. In fact, I very often will say that middle leadership and subject leadership, those leaders are the engine room of the school. Pastoral leaders, that's the engine room of the school. That's what will make the difference between a school's success or a school's failure. And then, in addition, the key priorities that this research also found is that external objective support and evaluation, such as governance or a school improvement partner or a school consultant, is essential as a key priority for school improvement. And we'll come to that a little bit later. So let's first of all look at the quality of teaching. It's important when you're starting any school improvement process to first of all assess teachers' performance. So if you're going into a new school as a new head of school, the first thing you should be looking at is assess teachers' performance, look at their attitude, and look at also their capacity to improve. So it may be that that they're not good yet. It may be that their practice is not quite good yet. But if they've got the right attitude and they've got the capacity to improve, they should not be written off. And very often, if a teacher is not making progress in a school, or if a teacher is not good at teaching in a school, school owners, school leaders often just get rid of them without developing them or looking at their attitude and capacity to improve. And that's what you need to do in the first instance. Look at their attitude and their capacity to improve. It's important for school leaders to put clear and regular structures for monitoring the effectiveness of teaching and learning, or should I say learning and teaching. And I've put that in specifically in that order. Very often we say teaching and learning, and the focus really is on teaching, particularly within the African setting. But it's really, really important to not simply monitor the teaching, but actually the learning of the students in lessons. And that's what will determine whether students are going to improve their practice and make progress. There needs to be, teaching and learning needs to feed into systematic and rigorous performance management structures. Now, very often in this setting, I've heard about appraisals, and I've heard about appraisals being done looking at attendance, looking at punctuality, looking at the way the teacher is dressed, looking at whether they've come with their instructional materials, and so on and so forth. But actually, very often what we miss in the appraisal system is the teacher's performance in the classroom, not just do they have posters on the board? Have they put the lesson objective on the board? Do they have their instructional materials? Do they have their lesson notes? It's not a tick list. Systematic and rigorous performance management includes lesson observations where you're looking at the quality of learning. How well are the students learning and responding to the teaching that is taking place? And this should be part of a systematic performance management structure. Now, understand that appraisal is not something that is just done at the end of the year. Appraisals should be in a cycle. Performance management should be in a cycle. Around September, October time, you sit down with your leaders, your subject leaders, or your, you know, who the person that you are line managed by, and you set targets based on your current performance. You might set targets. Your target might be to move from requires improvement to consistently good teaching. That might be one of your targets. Another target for a good teacher might to be improved differentiation in the lessons to meet the needs of all learners. Another target could be to develop and use assessment for learning strategies in the classroom to check on progress during learning. So those are the types of performance management targets that you set in around October, around midterm, first term, and then around February, which is sort of midterm, just before midterm, second term, you now monitor the progress towards those targets. So you have another meeting with your line manager, and the teacher is supposed to bring evidence to suggest that they are on the way to meeting those targets, which might include things like lesson observations, learning walk, notes, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, around July, towards the end of third term, you now look again to see whether the teacher has met their targets. So that's what a rigorous performance management structure should look like. It's important that teachers get regular professional development opportunities. Very often, I have been in schools where school owners are reluctant to pay for training or reluctant to give their teachers training because their attitude is the teachers are going to leave and go and find a job somewhere else. So what? The bottom line is, in order for your teachers to develop and to develop and to teach your children very, very well, you must train them. And we must also understand that our staff are not going to stay with us forever. You know, we want them to develop. We want them to develop professionally. You know, when you look at some schools that have got a really good reputation for developing their staff and doing training, those are the schools that we want to recruit from. So it's really, really important. It gives you a good reputation if you regularly develop your teachers and your staff. It also helps to one of the key factors or the key elements of improving the quality of teaching is also improving staff morale and motivation. So it's really, really important that your staff are motivated, and they're motivated, and motivation and morale doesn't necessarily just revolve around money. And anybody that thinks that that is the case is sadly mistaken. In some of the best schools that I have worked with, staff morale and motivation is about giving excellence. It's about being part of a team. It's about giving back to students and being part of a team. So it's about collaboration. It's about raising standards. It's about being the best. It's about good leadership. It's also important to celebrate good practice when we're looking at teaching and learning. So having a teacher of the week and being able to substantiate why that teacher is teacher of the week is also good. Teacher of the month, teacher of the term, and so on and so forth. It's incredibly important that that school leaders are willing and able to take robust action when performance is deemed poor. Now, that doesn't simply mean getting rid of them, firing them, sacking them. You have to put the support structures in place first. You have to make sure that you are coaching, supporting, training, and when you're doing all of those things and then performance is still poor, at that point, they now move on to a capability process with the objective that they're actually going to leave your school. It's important as a school leader to strengthen the relationship between performance management and developmental activities. So there should be a link between the targets that you set for your staff. So if there's a focus in your school on, for example, assessment for learning, then it's important that every teacher in the school will have a focus on assessment for learning. And therefore, the training relationship, the developmental activities that take place in your school should be linked and should be linked to those performance management targets. So, in other words, you have to put the training in place to support the staff achieving their performance management targets. Otherwise, it's to their detriment. And it's also to the school's detriment as well. And to refocus performance management on teaching and learning, it's absolutely imperative if you're looking to improve your school that the focus should be on improving the quality of teaching and learning. Effectiveness of leadership. Now, if you remember, what I said was that if it was me, I would have put effectiveness of leadership first. Good leadership is the key to rapid school improvement. You, as a good leader, sets the vision, sets the ethos, and the direction of the school. A good leader supports improving teacher morale, and improving teacher morale is about taking everybody with you, making sure that even though there is a focus on improving things, and even though that a school leader might come in and shake things up and might be saying things are not good enough and we need to raise standards and all of that, that you're actually taking your staff with you, you're taking your teachers with you, and you're maintaining and keeping teachers' morale as good as it can. And that could simply be celebrating the small milestones. It's important that school leaders believe that all pupils can achieve and sharing that belief with all the stakeholders. So it's important for school leaders to connect with teachers, with their school leadership, with parents, with governors, with school directors, and it is important that they share the belief that the pupils can achieve and can do well, regardless of their starting point. It's essential that parents get buy-in to any new changes and new initiatives. Now, if our parents, especially in private schools, um, but even not in private schools, our parents are most, in some cases, um, in some cases, we see our parents as the most important factor. And to some extent, they are important. It is important that if you're making changes in your school and you're introducing new initiatives, that you communicate with your parent, your PTA. It's absolutely essential that you get them on board, that they understand that you're implementing changes, what those changes are, and why those changes are coming into place. So, for example, if you decide that you're going to have a focus on monitoring student progress rather than student attainment, and on that basis, initially the grades of students might appear to go down, parents need to understand what that is for, why that might happen, and understand that actually what you're trying to do is monitor progress over time, not simply monitor a grade. In other words, you're not just monitoring attainment. Effective school leadership is also responsible for enriching the curriculum. So part of enriching the curriculum, remember that a curriculum is not simply whether you're going to do the Nigerian curriculum, whether you're implementing the British curriculum or the early years curriculum or whatever. It's everything the school does to educate that child. So it's your extracurricular, it's what you do in break times, what you do at lunchtime, what you do with children before school, after school. Enriching the curriculum means every aspect of, of school life. And if you're going to be an effective school improvement, if you're going to be effective in school improvement, you need to make sure that you are enriching and developing the curriculum and you're not standing still. So an example of that, for example, might be now some schools may be looking to enhance um, um, enhance the use of ICT, the use of computers, the use of coding in their curriculum and have more emphasis on those things based on things that have happened in the last 5 or 6 months across the world. It's important that effective leaders are develop and strengthen middle leaders. Like I said earlier, middle leaders are the engine room of the school. They are the ones that are going to make the difference between the success or failure of any strategy you put in place. In some cases, in some schools, the senior leadership team is maybe 1 or 2 people, and 1 or 2 people are not going to drive standards up across the school. You have to be able to develop and strengthen middle leaders and empower them to be the engine room of the school. So, in other words, when you are out of off-site, you're at a meeting, you've had to go and meet with stakeholders, or you've had to go and see a parent, your school is going to continue to run, and the middle leaders are going to be responsible for making sure that standards don't drop. It's important to encourage professional innovation, and professional innovation means advancing skills, looking at different ways of teaching. So let me give you an example of that. Innovation might be the introduction of the flipped classroom or of blended learning. As we move forward into an era where the use of ICT in teaching students off-site, that's become our new norm. Then professional innovation is about making sure that our teachers have access to effective training in those areas. So the effectiveness of leadership, the quality of teaching and learning are the first 2 areas that we need to look at when we're looking at school improvement strategies. And then the last one is encourage an effective school leader will also encourage good quality external support, and that could be as in the form of a consultant or a school improvement partner or a governor who comes in for monthly or termly monitoring visits and has a very objective view of your school and is able to give you objective feedback. Very often, sometimes when we're in schools, with the best intentions, we might see let's give you an example. You as a school leader might go in and see a typically good teacher teach an inadequate lesson. But because we know that teacher is a good teacher, we are biased. And so instead of giving them an inadequate judgment, we might give them a judgment that says this lesson requires improvement rather than having inadequate. Whereas if you've got external support coming in, they are likely to be far more objective when they're making their judgments on teaching and learning, on the quality of teaching and learning. So it's important to identify good quality external support, people that know what they're doing, and people with a focus on school improvement and the school improvement agenda. One of the other key elements of school improvement, and to me this is also one of the most important, is tracking data and monitoring systems. Now, I could spend the rest of the hour talking about tracking data and monitoring systems, but I'm sure you'll get bored and switch off. But we're looking at things like quality. Now, very often, when we're monitoring the quality of teaching and learning, we go in, we do our observation, we give the teacher some feedback, but there is never the quality of the teaching is not tracked over time. So in other words, how do you know that the quality of teaching and learning is improving and is improving over time? So how do you know the impact and the effectiveness of all the strategies that you're putting in place? What's the point of doing lesson observations if you're not tracking those observations over time? What's the point of doing training if you're not tracking the impact of that training over time? What's the point of looking at students' books and looking at the quality of marking if you're not tracking that over time and understanding that it's improving? So it's important that when we're looking at the quality of learning, we monitor, we track it. We have a system, a database where we are monitoring the quality of lessons, where we're looking and we're analysing the quality of our learning walks. Learning walks are when we're simply walking around school, getting a feel for what's going on in the classroom. It's important when we're doing our inspections of the classroom environment So we have a document that supports that says that this teacher has got an excellent classroom environment and that this other teacher is not taking care of their classroom environment and needs to make improvements. It's important when we're looking at the quality of marking and we're looking at what is in students' books that we're actually monitoring the quality and we're looking at the fact that the quality is improving over time. And then obviously the typical things like instructional materials, lesson resources, lesson notes, and lesson plans. It's important that those things are in place also and that we track them. We make sure that those things are in place because we need to monitor them over time to demonstrate that things are improving. How have you got evidence as a school leader to show your school owner or the school governors, the school directors? How have you got evidence if you don't track that information over a period of time? Then the other aspect is academic data and progress. And I've talked a little bit about this along the way. Common tracking formats for all staff, making sure that there's a database where where staff can actually put their academic data over a period of time. It's important that when data comes in, when we need to understand that when we're doing assessments, we're not just doing them to report to parents how well students are doing. We need to be able to use that as an effective device. And this does not happen, by and large, does not happen in schools I've worked, most schools, not all, most schools that I've worked with in Africa. They do not use data to inform learning. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say that you do an assessment and you find out that question 5, most of your students did not get that right. That's a gap analysis. We identify a gap analysis. We do a gap analysis. In other words, the gap in learning. The gap analysis is the gap in learning to identify areas of weakness. So why did 90% of your students do badly on that particular question? Is it because you were absent when that lesson was taught? Number one. Is it because you didn't teach that very well because you're not very confident as a classroom teacher? Is it because you thought you taught it well, but perhaps the way the question was asked is different from the way children, maybe the actual question that you wrote was not written in such a way that it was easy for students to comprehend. So it's important that we use a gap analysis to identify areas of weakness in the curriculum and to use that now to plan effective lessons where you can close the gap in learning. It's important to use data to improve the quality of teaching. And the key thing is that, as I said, I mentioned in the UK, we have we track student data all the way from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 4. Now, for the sake of those that are running a Nigerian curriculum, that is lower primary, upper primary, JS3 and JS4, the end of JS3 and the end of JS4. So we set targets based on their data, based on what they achieve in lower primary. We would now set a target for them at the end of upper primary, and then we'd set a target based on what they get at the end of primary to the end of JS3, and then we would send another target for what they should be achieving at the end of Key Stage 4. So we need to be able to track that data and progress over a long period of time. And these are really important systems to have in place. Most schools, not all, but most schools I've worked in Africa have not had those systems in place and therefore have not adequately been able to track student progress over a period of time. School improvement and school evaluation. Now, school evaluation is about doing a 360 evaluation to determine the school's starting point. So if you were going in at the start of a new year, it's important that you do a number of things. It's important that you look at student data to determine what student starting points are. That's as a class teacher, as a subject leader, as a middle leader, and as a senior leader. Look at student data. It's important that you do baseline lesson observations to look at the quality of your existing and new staff that have come on board at the start of each year, each academic year, or each term. So it's important to do an evaluation to determine what your starting points are. It's then important as a whole leadership team, both middle leaders, senior leaders, and even teachers, to do a critical self-evaluation at all levels. Now, this also means teachers doing their own self-evaluation. What am I good at? What am I not so good at? Because that part of what I'm not so good at is what will feed into their performance management targets at the end of um, the first half term. So it's important that critical self-evaluation at all levels and including all stakeholders. So what do I mean? I've talked about teachers, I've talked about middle leaders, I've talked about senior leaders, but I'm also including their parents. What do parents feel are the strengths and areas that the school needs to develop over time? So when you're doing a critical self-evaluation, you're asking everybody to be honest, to be transparent, to be truthful, in order for you to identify what your weak areas are, in order for you to begin to now develop detailed and measurable 3-year school improvement plans. And from the school improvement plan, you would now develop department improvement plans. But, so that the middle leaders, the departments, the different sections of the school will also take their development plans out of the school improvement plan and set appropriate targets for all of their staff, all of their teachers, and for the departments. And then to set whole school targets that should inform the priorities for performance management. So if your target for your school is that 80% of your students are going to get distinction in the primary 6 examination, then that should be the target for every year 6 teacher. And it should also be a target for year 5 teacher. And that would therefore be a target, a school target across the board for all teachers, that 80% of your students need to be operating on or above the percentage required to get a distinction. So I hope that makes sense. Whole school targets should inform the priorities for teacher performance. And then all school monitoring or whole school monitoring and evaluation should be supported by appropriate data. So we talked on my last slide about the importance of rigorous data keeping and collection of data. And that's really, really important for effective school leaders. So I've run through very, very quickly 3 or 4 areas that I think school leaders need to focus on in order to drive a culture of change. And it's not always easy when you're going into a new school or where you're going in with a new attitude at the start of the school year. It is not always easy driving a culture of change. So how do we do that? First of all, it's important that school leaders have a sense of modesty, honesty, and teamwork. Understand that as a school leader, you cannot do this on your own. Very often in shall I just say in the African setting, across not just schools but across the whole spectrum, bosses tend to have a very top-down, domineering type of attitude. But in school leadership, you can't do that. In school leadership, and especially in an environment where you're trying to change the culture of an organization, you have to understand that you can't do it on your own. You need your senior leadership team, you need your middle leadership team, and you need all the teachers to be working and pulling in the same direction. So it's important to be honest about how well you're doing and the areas where you're not doing so well. It's important that you're modest, and it's important that you work together as a team. There's a need for leadership to receive external support and collaboration. I can't say this enough. It is really, really important. Sometimes, and this is something that I've found even in the best of schools, school leaders get caught up with the operational management of the school rather than dealing with the strategic improvements that the school needs to make. So sometimes it's important to work with external support, whether it be a consultant, whether it be a school improvement partner, whether it be governors, whether it be your directors that come in occasionally to review your school, to evaluate standards and so on, and to work with you as leaders to give you honest and transparent feedback about where your school is. It's important that we understand that when the inspectors come in, and when I talk about inspectors, it could be your local inspection team, it could be your consultant, your directors, your governors. When they come in, they should be coming in with an attitude to support and to evaluate. And it's really, really important that we don't become defensive when things are not going well. It's important to have the right attitude as a school leader. If you're going to drive a culture of change, it's important that the attitudes of everybody is that of honesty, transparency, and to some extent, I don't like to use this word particularly, but humility, to be modest in our views. It's not necessarily to be defensive, because being defensive about the systems that you have in place is not going to help your school. You need to have the right attitude towards people that are coming in to help and support you. You need to be able to diagnose your problems in the first place in order to be able to drive a culture of change in your organization. And you need to, as I've mentioned before, you need to focus on staff morale and motivation. Because if you're trying to drive a culture of change, you're making people feel uncomfortable. You're asking them to come out of their comfort zone. And if you're working with someone like me, for example, I'm going to push your teachers beyond their comfort zone. I'm going to be pushing them to become international teachers, international learning practitioners, facilitators of learning, rather than simply giving out knowledge and content. So it's important that we learn to build our staff morale, motivate them, drive them, make sure that they're open to change and open to the advice that they're down. Carrying people along. I think this is the thing that encompasses all of that. Make sure you're carrying people along. Make sure that they don't necessarily feel threatened. Now, of course, there are some teachers that don't want to move, that don't want to change, that have a very negative attitude. And to be fair, if you're driving a culture of change, those are the people that you need to encourage to leave your organization, because the rest of them are the ones that you need to carry along. So if you've got negativity in your organization, if you've got gossip in your organization, if you've got people that are backstabbing, if you've got people that don't want to move, don't want to change, don't understand why there is a need for change, that is not going to help you to drive a culture of change. So perhaps those people need to be encouraged to go and find a school that meets their own needs. Celebrate successes and milestones. And these are the things that will really help along the way. So you might still have a school that is not where you want it to be, but as long as you can celebrate the small milestones along the way. So, for example, an inadequate teacher has moved from being inadequate to simply requiring improvement. Now, that is a move. It's a small move, but it's a small milestone that you are able to celebrate. And it should be something that you encourage teachers to focus on. Look at the small things, look for the positive. I always say do a positive, negative, positive feedback when you're giving feedback to teachers. Positive comment, followed by negative comment, followed by a positive end to the conversation. And communication is the key with all stakeholders. When you're driving a culture of change, you must communicate, communicate, communicate. And when we look at the change that's happened over the last 5 or 6 months, the schools that have been the most successful are the ones that have communicated effectively with all of their key stakeholders, their parents, their teachers, their pupils, and anybody that's working within the organization as a stakeholder. Those are the schools that have been the most effective. So if you want to drive a culture of change, make sure that you communicate effectively with all the key stakeholders. So I want to end with words of inspiration. Culture does not change because we desire to change it. Culture changes when the organization is transformed. The culture reflects the realities of people working together every day. I leave you with that. I know that I have a lot of people listening in, a lot of people that you may be making comments, you may have questions. If you want to contact us, please take down the details that are on the screen. That you've got our email address, sebaconsultancyandtraining@gmail.com, and you've got our phone numbers there. If you're in the UK, you've got our UK line. If you're in Nigeria, you've got our Nigerian line. I don't have a number for every country that we work in across Africa, but those are two numbers that are there right now. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to come back to full screen. We'll stop sharing. I'm trusting that you fully enjoyed that mini training. I'm going to go back to our full screen and hopefully read some of our comments. So if you've got any comments, please put them in the comments box. I've seen there's a few comments on board, people saying hello, good afternoon. Thank you. Now, there are some of you that have not put your name. So I want to just thank you for coming on board. But next time that you're coming on, please make sure that you give Facebook permission to use your name. So Omotayo Florence says, thank you. I enjoyed it. I hope you find it most informative and useful. Another Facebook user said, great work is going on here. Shegun, thank you. Well done, he says. Thank you very much. Another Facebook user said, thank you, Miss Carol. This was really enlightening. It was very quick and it has been quite speedy, but I hope it just gave you a taste of some of the things that you need to think about as a school leader if you're looking at school improvement. So thank you so much. If there are any questions, please type your comments in the comment box. I have gone quite quickly through my slides, but if there is anybody that would like to ask any questions, I'm happy to take a moment or two to go through some questions. Anybody got any questions on any aspect of what I've talked about? So we've talked about quality of teaching. We've talked about data analysis. Please, how can I organize training for myself? Please take our number. Please take our number and our information. You can see our email address. In fact, our phone number is not on there, but I can put this at the end of this. I'll put our contact numbers, contact numbers up. You can contact us and we can book a training for your teachers. Thank you very much for that. Akin Benjamin says, great work is going on here. Thanks, Akin. I appreciate your support all the time. Can't miss this again. No, you can't. But it is going to be on the Nigerian Educators Lounge. It's going to be posted there. So please, if you know people that are not yet part of the Nigerian Educators Lounge, please share this. Invite them to join the Educators Lounge, because remember, it's all about continuous professional development. It's all about continuous professional development. So please, and please, when you're inviting them, remind them to answer the leadership questions, because I don't know who are members of Nigerian Educators Lounge. I don't know whether I do leadership training, teacher training, or whatever, unless I know who you are, what your role is in your school, and to have some contact details. Thanks, Kerry. Good to have you here. Thank you. I hope you listened in and found it useful. I've done some training for Kerry's school in Port Harcourt, a very, very great school and a great example of where school improvement is doing really, really well. Karen, I noticed you're also online. Thank you so much for joining us. Any more questions? Any more questions before we end? Thank you so much to those of you that have taken time to comment, to say thank you, to give your greetings. Thank you so, so much. And please share, invite all your friends. Next week, we're going to do a training for teachers, and we're going to be looking at how to improve the quality of teaching and learning and the things that you need to be looking for. Please remember that SEBA Consultancy and Training Services, we do coaching, we do training, we do developing leadership capacity, school improvement, and so on and so forth. And so, as we're moving into a time and a season where schools are preparing to go back, this will be a good time to book us for training, whether it be online or whether it be in person. All right, goodbye. God bless. Thank you so much for all of your support. Please do contact us. Let me just go back to my slides and see if I can still put up the contact details for those of you that would like to contact us. Okay, there are my contact details from current slide. Is it there? All right, from current slide. Okay, there's our contact details. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'll just leave that up for another minute so that people can contact us if they need to. Thank you very much and good night.